I'm just going to give you a taster of the kind of thing which I'm doing a lot around the world at the moment, both for corporates and for governments, not giving advice, but merely highlighting something. This study which I did, and is still ongoing, it's just never ending, it happens day after day after day, is about a skyful of lies. Why is it a skyful of lies? Because that's what the Burmese government said when people started using their mobile phones in Rangoon 3 years ago. And the great power now of the mobile phone, which I'll now find in my pocket, and you will all have in your pockets as well. It's the new power of this, essentially, 4 billion around the world to destabilize and create new accountability. And what has really grabbed a large number of people is the three concepts which I've been working on and doing a lot of brainstorming on about the new vulnerability of power in times of crisis. I sit there in studio and we are overwhelmed now by the amount of user-generated content, as we talk about it, not citizen journalism, user-generated content. It's about the new vulnerability, fragility and brittleness of power in times of crisis, because many corporates, many governments simply aren't understanding the new nature of the information space that I am part of. What you're doing, what everyone is doing with their mobile phones, is creating a new speed of information, a new information space, which is much faster than governments and corporates can respond. And that in turn is creating a new deficit of legitimacy. Because when people out there, the user generators, the information doers, the born digitals as we should call them, are out there in this new environment, they're providing information a lot faster than those in positions of power and responsibility can handle it. Who are these kind of people? They're the most unlikely. You wouldn't expect them to be bearers of, not just bearers of witness, but bearers of information. But someone like that behind the chador, or a monk, as you saw there, using a mobile phone, bearing witness in a time of crisis, which means you really have to ask the question, who is the media now? Now, I come from the traditional media, but my definition for everyone out there, including the big corporates, including the government, and in fact the new crisis response unit in the Cabinet Office here has used many of my recommendations and built on them, as have the Chinese government, is to understand it's not about the narrow definition of the media, it's about everyone out there now using this, who's become a member of the media, not a citizen journalist necessarily, but someone who is providing the witness of what is taking place in this new environment. Now, a ship capsizes in the Antarctic. It doesn't take days for the can of film or the video to emerge on an aircraft. This emerges literally within a couple of hours digitally, providing first ideas of what's taken place, and also in this case, fortunately, the fact that most people survived. So we're seeing a new transparency in this new digital age, a transparency which you will take for granted, which I don't probably even have to tell you about, but what it's doing is it's catching unaware and it's surprising with what it reveals. And that's what's creating the new vulnerability in these times of crisis. Everywhere you go, whether there's a fire in the centre of Beijing, which the Chinese authorities denied, or whether it's the G20 protest, that bit of video of Ian Tomlinson, the newspaper seller who was pushed to the ground, if you remember, that came out because a 38-year-old investment banker was passing by at the time. It took several days for Paul Lewis of The Guardian to find that chap, but that has become central to the case against the police. I gave a presentation recently in Washington, and there were a lot of first responders there, crisis people, crisis experts, and they said, we're trained to think in 6 to 8 hours, 6 to 12 hours, one of them said. I said, if you're lucky, you've got 6 to 12 minutes in this new information space. And they were kind of taken aback, and they were professionals at the heart of the system. And this is about how the systems still haven't adapted to this new inexorable reality where the impact gets greater and the timeline gets shorter. As these new bearers of witness move into the space, we're all doing it. It could happen out there in London at a moment's notice. This line is gradually coming towards zero. And that is why I would say that you're lucky if you've got an hour to respond. And most systems, though, are not prepared for that. Think of the price, though, and the dilemmas. think of what happened, those of you who were here on the 7th of July 5 years ago when London was bombed. But Ian Blair, less than 3 hours after the incident, decided to go on television and say, London is safe. He decided to move into this space very quickly. Yet 15 days later, with Jean-Charles de Menezes, because of the information he didn't get through the Metropolitan Police system at Scotland Yard, and this is a long dispute still, because of Andy Hayman and others, and this is disputed, he refused to say publicly, and couldn't say publicly, that Jean-Charles de Menezes was not a terrorist. For 24 hours, he kept that message in the public eye, the idea that he was still some kind of terrorist suspect, even though within hours of him being shot at Stockwell Tube, it was known by the Met, even off-duty officers at Lord's Cricket Ground, that a terrible, terrible mistake had been made. So those are the big dilemmas, whether in a big corporate or a big government. And as a very senior official in Whitehall said to me, you're spot on, I'm sorry to say, but our systems have yet to adapt. Everything I've told you is pretty obvious. But as I say, the most obvious is often the most elusive.